Hi, I'm Johnny.
Hi, I'm Sarah, and we're from the Insights team at Google.
Decoding Decisions is our research to address a simple but fundamental question for marketers. How do people decide what to buy? And we tackle that through the lens of behavioural science and a combination of observation, literature review, and experiments. Now, some of you may be familiar with the research and the concept of the messy middle already, and some not. So before we move on to our new insights, we'll provide a quick reminder of what it's all about. It all began with an insight from search. Over time, people are increasingly using words such as best in their search queries, and less frequently using words like cheap. In a world of almost limitless information and abundant product choice, it's an illustration of how the internet has gone from a place where people go to compare prices to a place where people go to compare everything. And we observed that between a trigger to becoming in market and an eventual purchase, consumer behaviour is extremely messy and non-linear. But when we looked more closely, we found that really just two distinct mindsets at play. Exploration, an expansive mindset where we're adding brands and information for consideration, and evaluation, a reductive mindset where we're narrowing down our available options before making a decision. We might be evaluating a few options, but not feeling confident enough to make a decision yet. So we often move back and forth between exploring and evaluating multiple times before eventually exiting the messy middle and making a purchase. And presented with almost limitless information and choice, we find ways to cut through all this complexity using a range of mental shortcuts without really noticing. That's where the behavioural science comes in. As an illustration, here we have a hotel brand and some typical information they might provide online. Except in building this proposition, each of the boxes also represents an expression of a behavioural science principle. 6 carefully chosen principles that we found were particularly relevant to purchase decision-making. For example, star ratings and reviews are an example of social proof, where we tend to follow the herd and the recommendations of others. A free room upgrade is an example of the power of free, where we're disproportionately attracted to getting something for a price of precisely 0. And all-inclusive is a typical heuristic or rule of thumb in the hotel category that can act as a decision-making shortcut when there's lots of information to process. Behavioural science helps us understand why we find such information useful and compelling, and helps us to generate different variations to test. Using this framework, we asked people to participate in a survey-based experiment where they were asked to choose between their first-choice hotel brand and, in this instance, an entirely invented hotel brand, Stay In Hotels, which we created for this research. And the ingredients underneath were randomly rotated so that we could understand how much of people's decision-making was being driven by the brand versus all the other information. We initially tested this across 32 categories in the UK with 1,000 in-market consumers for each, and what we found was striking. Depending on the category, anywhere from 28 to 87% of people were willing to move away from their first-choice brand to a brand they'd never heard of before when that new brand was what we call supercharged, meaning it was given the stronger expressions of all those 6 behavioural science principles. This isn't to say that brands aren't important. It's actually remarkable how many people stuck with their first-choice brands in the presence of an alternative with a vastly superior proposition. But it does show that established brands may be vulnerable to competitors if they're not on their game. And yes, to do this, research across dozens of categories meant creating dozens of invented brands, which was a lot of fun, with Honey C's breakfast cereal and Paws Delight cat food being a couple of our personal favourites. We published these and other insights in our 2020 report, Making Sense of the Messy Middle. And what follows is a preview of insights from our sequel report coming out soon, called Marketing in the Messy Middle. So what new insights do we have to share? Well, the messy middle is, as you now know, a very messy place. People navigating countless online destinations and environments. As a marketer, there are many places you have little or no control over what the consumer sees, on a competitor's website, for example. But there are places where you do have some control over the information presented about your brands, such as your paid and organic presence in search, the content on your website, app, or other properties, and in the places where you make your products available for sale. So to build on the insights from our original research, and to address some of the key questions we were asked by our customers, Marketing in the Messy Middle is all about applying behavioural science thinking in these 3 environments.
So let's start with the first of those 3 environments, search. We investigated whether the creative and responsible application of behavioural science could also have a significant impact on which search results people choose. Instead of asking people to choose from 2 hotel brands side by side, this time we asked people to review 3 search results. 1 for their first choice brand, one for their second choice brand, and one from our invented hotel brand. And we asked people which of the three they would click on. Similar to our earlier research, we used behavioural science principles to generate different ways of expressing the brand's proposition. Now, this may look like a fairly typical search ad, but there's actually a bit more to it than that. We constructed the ad copy to test 6 behavioural science principles. 3 are the same as before, and 3 are new ones that seemed particularly relevant in a mainly text-based environment like search, including order effect and one of my personal favourites, the pratfall effect. The pratfall effect is where you emphasise an imperfection and elevate it to become a benefit, like a cosy, aka very small room, marketed as comfortable enough when it's good value and you're not going to be in the room much anyway. This was actually one of the most powerful expressions we tested. In the test, we randomly rotated the brands and the ad copy in different combinations so that we could understand what happens when, for example, the first choice brand appeared in the top position with regular ad copy, but the invented brand appeared in second position with supercharged ad copy. And similar to our earlier study, our results for search suggest that brand preferences are pretty sticky. The majority of people chose to click on the ad for their first choice brand, even when it had relatively weaker ad copy. But it did show that challenger brands are, theoretically, able to disrupt preferences in the messy middle. They earned a significant share of clicks simply by turning up and by supercharging their ad copy with insights from behavioural science.
Now let's imagine that someone has clicked through from search to view content on your website. By searching and landing on your site, someone has expressed some intent and some interest, so that's a good start. Now you may or may not sell your product on your website, but either way, you're probably hoping that a visit will make someone more likely to consider purchasing your brand. But purchase consideration is something marketers think about, not consumers. What are they looking for? It would be easy to say they're looking whether or not to buy your product, but really it's confidence that they're looking for. For some people, it's feeling confident that they're making the absolute best choice they can, and they may be exploring and evaluating for hours, weeks, or months to get there. For others, it's simply feeling confident their choice is good enough, confident they wouldn't be making a poor choice. So let's park that consideration goal for now and focus on your potential customer. How can you give them more confidence? Is there any reciprocal value if you do? To understand what makes us feel more confident, we need to understand our information needs in the messy middle, a topic we've been researching deeply. When we're in an exploration mindset, we're likely to want to understand the brands and retailers in the category, what range of products are available, an idea of the range of prices on offer, maybe get some inspiration. Without this, we don't know what we don't know. When we're in an evaluation mindset and narrowing down our options, we might be more interested in things like availability, delivery terms, and payment plans. We may also encounter some psychological barriers. Choice overload might cause us to get stuck in exploration. An ever-expanding set of options might make us less likely to be able to decide, and therefore less likely to buy. We might get stuck in evaluation, not finding enough validation from experts or past customers to get from a few options down to a final one. And fear of missing out, which is knowing there may always be the possibility of a better option, might stop us from ever quite exiting the messy middle. So as a marketer, you have an opportunity to help potential customers to successfully explore and evaluate and exit the messy middle by meeting their information needs and helping them overcome barriers to making a decision. Whilst these needs and feelings are different from person to person, on average, people feel more confident in some categories than others. For example, people don't feel very confident at all when shopping for a fitted kitchen, but much more confident shopping for breakfast cereal. And our enjoyment of the category makes a difference too. In those we enjoy, we're less likely to hit some of those psychological barriers. On the whole, people say they enjoy shopping for makeup and package holidays, rather more than for utilities and insurance. And finally, the permanence of the purchase, for how long you'll have to live with this decision, makes a difference too. Something like a sofa is a much more permanent decision for us to live with than a new credit card or a bottle of shampoo. To understand how a brand might help a potential customer's confidence, we took one of our invented brands, Miller Sofas, and experimented with different information on a website that we invented for it. This time, we asked people to pick between 2 versions of a landing page, or neither, with the question being, which version makes you feel more confident in general about purchasing a sofa? Note that we weren't asking them about buying a sofa from Miller, just about their confidence in general. The way we conducted our experiment with lots of randomized combinations allows us to create what we call a bronze, silver, and gold medal version of the landing page. In the bronze version, it's a fairly basic page, but we can add to it and upgrade it. Let's add a badge of endorsement from a home magazine, some consumer review star ratings, a buying guide to help people understand the range of options, and some general delivery terms. Next, let's make the experience more cognitively easy. Let's adapt some of the hero text and imagery and show a price range scale to help people understand roughly how much the sofas vary in cost. All of these changes so far are just surfacing information that a sofa company like Miller, if it existed, might already have available, and tweaking text and imagery. This is our silver medal version. But we can do better again. These next changes might involve more effort, cost, and they may need to be earned, not paid for. Let's upgrade our expert endorsement to be from a leading consumer review company and boost the customer reviews from 4.5 stars to 4.8. We're also going to offer market-leading delivery terms and upgrade our buying guide to a more advanced buying tool. We'll also replace our hero imagery and text and make the categories of sofa on offer more easy to understand, and we'll create some useful pricing bands. This leaves us with our gold medal version of the Miller Sofas landing page. And in case you hadn't guessed it already, all of the different things we tested on their page were informed by behavioral science principles when we are in an exploration mindset, and each panel corresponds to an information need or barrier from earlier. So how did our 3 versions perform in terms of driving consumer confidence in buying a sofa? Well, a far higher proportion chose silver than bronze, and it's worth remembering that by going from bronze to silver, we only really used information that a company like Miller might have already. When we were able to supercharge the page with the strongest expression of the behavioral science, then the proportion of people choosing gold increased significantly again. And also, fewer people chose the neither option, suggesting that they would be less likely to leave the site and look elsewhere. We also conducted a near-identical experiment for people in an evaluation mindset. And for this, we mocked up a product page instead. To address some information needs of evaluation, we started with a bronze version, but then included things such as payment plan options. We tested different ways of communicating price, and we offered a trial period to reduce risk. Again, we can upgrade from silver to gold by further improving various things, such as the ratings and reviews, making clearer default delivery terms, and offering a tool to visualize the sofa in your own home. Again, each panel on this page represents an information need or a barrier, and a relevant behavioral science principle. And no surprises here, but the silver version of our product page created significantly more consumer confidence than the bronze, and the gold more than the silver. So how about our 2 goals? The marketer looking to drive consideration for their brand, and the potential customer looking to feel more confident about making a good decision. Well, we repeated our exploration and evaluation experiments over again and tested all of exactly the same things, only this time we didn't ask people which gave them more confidence, but which would make them more likely to buy a sofa from Miller Sofas. And what we find is that the same things that give people confidence in making a good decision also drive consideration for the brand providing that information. It suggests there's a reciprocity at play. For marketers that go to the lengths of helping people to explore and evaluate the category as a whole, there's the potential to be paid back for your helpfulness through greater consideration for your brand. It suggests a win-win.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about what people buy, but what about where people buy from? So far, we've looked at search through stay-in hotels and website content through Miller Sofas. Now, as we turn our attention to our 3rd marketing environment, points of sale, we'll be shopping for trainers. Imagine I've been exploring and evaluating, looping all around the messy middle, and now I'm feeling confident and ready to commit. I have a brand and a shop in mind. I've bought from them both before. Let's say they are my first choice. But at the last moment, I've just spotted another brand I quite like the look of, called Nisis, and they're available online from a retailer called Around the Track. Now, they are very, very tempting, but it's a bit risky. I've never bought from either of those brands before. So, how likely would I be to buy Nisis trainers from Around the Track when I could just buy from the more familiar brand and retailer I already had in mind? Well, we put that to the test. We took these 2 unfamiliar brands and we put them up against leading brands to understand how much we could persuade 1,000 trainer shoppers to switch to Nisis or Around the Track. We tested a lot of the same principles we've already talked about, but we did add 2 new things that are key for retail. Firstly, we added delivery friction. How quickly can consumers receive the item? And secondly, price. Now, price is not a behavioural science principle, but we also know when it comes to buying, we really couldn't leave it out. So we did include price and also tested the impact of applying a 10 or a 15% discount. And what were the results? Well, when we supercharged the NISIS proposition with the strongest expressions of the behavioural science principles, 31% of preference shifted from people's original first choice to NISIS. And that's just the behavioural science expressions, not the impact of pricing. Not bad, given as you might have guessed by now, NISIS is another one of our invented brands. What about Around the Track, which was our invented retailer? When we supercharged Around the Track, the shift was even greater. 84% of preference shifted from people's first choice, an industry-leading retailer, to Around the Track. So what's going on? What drives decision-making, and why were so many more people tempted to switch to the Around the Track retailer than to NISIS trainers? Looking at the principles we tested in this experiment, some of these are more in the control of the product brand, things like reviews and endorsements for the item, and the product benefits. Other things are more the responsibility of the retailer, things like delivery timings, pricing promotion, and the power of free. And there is also, of course, the influence of the brands themselves. Now, across the thousands of decisions that were modelled through the experiment, we can understand how much each of these elements contributed to decision-making. Here are 3 key things we learnt. Firstly, if we do look at how much each element we tested contributed to driving consumer choice, what's interesting is that roughly half of the drivers are more about the product, the what, and half are more in the control of the retailer, the where. That tells us that both are important. Consumers want the right product, and they also want a convenient shopping experience from retailers. And for marketers, it tells us that whether you're focused on retail or product marketing, or perhaps it's both, there are behavioural science levers on either side that influence consumer decision-making. And ideally, these will be delivered in harmony so consumers do get the right product with the right experience. Secondly, what we see here is the importance the brands themselves play in decision-making. You can see that the blue segment, representing the influence of the product brand, is much larger than the green one, where the green one represents the retailer brand. It's actually 3 times larger. And this makes sense. If I've already got a pair of trainers in mind, it's much easier to disrupt where I buy those trainers from than which trainers I want. It's why Around the Track was able to attract more customers than NISIS. It also means for retailers that having the right range of products in stock is really important. Thirdly, it will come as no surprise that price and discounting were really important drivers of choice, accounting for 30% in our trainer study. But it's interesting to see that other levers we tested can have an equivalent impact on consumer choice. The combination of social proof, such as high-star ratings from other users, good delivery policies, and the power of free, think a 30-day free trial of a running app, those had as much impact on decision-making in our test as price and discounting. In fact, when we supercharged the trainer's proposition with the strongest expressions of the behavioural science principles, those actually had more impact on people's choice than a 10% discount. And, of course, we didn't just test this for trainers. We've tested for a range of products and services, tweaking some of the principles where appropriate. We've tested trainers, laptops, moisturiser, dog food, whiskey, second-hand cars, flights, hotels, and mobile SIM contracts. Which meant, in addition to inventing these 9 brands, we invented 9 retailers too. And when we pit these invented product brands against the leading equivalents in their field, we found consistently, as we did with the original decoding decisions, that supercharging the proposition with behavioural science will shift some share from someone's first choice brand to their second choice brand, or as shown here, to completely invented brands. But for retailers, this effect is really, really pronounced. Even completely unheard of retailers stand to shift considerable share from people's original preference when they supercharge their proposition, which represents a risk and an opportunity for established retailers and newcomers alike. Now, given this lack of stickiness for retailers, it can be especially tempting for them to compete on price and to consider discounting. If we sum up the results across all the categories we tested and look at what most drove consumer decision-making in our test, the single element most contributing to the decision was price and discounting. But that's still only one element driving the choice. There's a whole lot more happening. Factoring in all the elements we tested, and these are not exhaustive of every factor that could influence people's decisions in these categories, we still find 70% of choice is being driven by things other than price. The power of the brands themselves contributed significantly to decision-making, and then supercharging with the best expressions of behavioural science helped further. The best application of behavioural science will vary in feasibility depending on the brand. Some of the principles we've described today are easier to implement. For example, showcasing great reviews for a sofa. If you have those credentials already, amazing. But other expressions do require longer-term or more significant investment. For example, shortening a product delivery window could be a large and expensive undertaking. But before you discount, do look at all the other levers you might be able to use, especially the ones that aren't as costly for your brand to achieve, because these things do influence decisions.
So, what key insights have we uncovered about marketing in the messy middle?
In search, we've seen that brands could earn a greater share of clicks by supercharging their ad copy with insights from behavioural science.
And we've seen that providing content that helps people feel generally more confident about making a decision could also drive consideration for a brand.
And we've seen that price discounting is only one of a number of tactics that marketers could employ at points of sale to have a compelling proposition.
And whether you're an established brand or a challenger brand, the three main takeaways from decoding decisions are exactly the same.
Firstly, ensure your brand has broad presence and campaign coverage in the messy middle, because all of our experiments have shown that brands can win a share of consumer preference simply by showing up.
Secondly, close the gap between trigger and purchase by creating brilliant ads that draw people to your properties and by providing helpful content that meets their information needs.
And finally, craft compelling propositions informed by the behavioural science that address the underlying drivers of what people choose to buy and from where.